two signs that you really have a micromanagement culture or a culture where the employees have become dependent on leadership to make decisions for them. The two things that you'll see is you'll frequently hear employees asking, "What do you want me to do?" This group of people is conditioned to sit and wait for me to tell them what to do. They don't know how to make a recommendation, right? They don't know how
Mhm.
to think through a problem.
What do you think that are the effects of micromanagement on a company and on the employees?
Yeah. The biggest one is that people don't feel ownership when they're making a recommendation. They now own the decision. They share ownership in the decision. If you're a CEO or a, C-level executive and you have leaders below you that are micromanagers, you absolutely have an obligation to deal with it.
Hi everyone, welcome back to the Improve Work podcast. Today we'll be discussing a topic that is relevant to every entrepreneur with a team, smaller or larger, and to all leaders, whether they are in middle or top management. We'll be talking about micromanagement with Christopher Seifert. Did I pronounce it correctly? Your name?
Yeah, Danielle, it's actually Seifert.
Okay. Christopher is an expert on this subject, and he has even written a book about this. This is titled Enabling Empowerment, a Leadership Playbook for Ending Micromanagement and Empowering Decision Makers. He's also the founder of the Enabling Empowerment Company, which provides training programs, courses, and consultancy services to help develop skills such as decision making, leadership, and enabling culture transformation. Welcome, Christopher. Thank you for being
Uh,
here.
Thanks, Danielle. Appreciate the opportunity.
Before we dive into our topic, please tell us a little bit more about yourself and how did you decide to transition to this type of work. I know that you were an US Navy submarine officer before,
Yes.
and you decided to do this now. How did
Yep.
you make this transition?
Sure. Absolutely. So yes, I've spent, my career spanned about 25 years. It has, started in the U.S. Navy in the submarine force, as you mentioned, spent 8 years on active duty. I then transitioned out, went into manufacturing, spent about 8 years between Georgia Pacific and Owens Corning, as a plant manager. Also a lot of time doing large capital projects and investments. Then went into consulting for about 8 years, working mostly in the oil and gas industry and high hazard chemical industries, working on management systems and culture transformations. And then one last tour as an operator. I was a vice president of operations for a large biomass manufacturer for about 6 years. And during that 6 year period, we grew the revenue from 350 million to 1.3 billion, and from four plants to 10 plants and four ports. So tremendous growth. And at the end of that 6 years, I kind of said, hey, I need a break, right? That was a crazy growth pace for that company. I need a break. And over the course of my career, one of the things that I've just seen leaders struggle with, right, is micromanagement. And often it's not that they want to be micromanagers. They found themselves in a situation where they're having to be micromanagers and they don't know how to get out of it. And that's, something I've been very passionate about my whole career. And so decided to start enabling empowerment and write the book.
Was it difficult to make this transition?
Well, I mean, hey, anytime you're starting a business, there's obviously a challenge, right? I mean, in terms of, just uh, creating the vision and getting and creating a market and getting out there. But I just think my belief is that you know, this is such an important thing, and there's so many leaders who are struggling with this, don't want to be struggling with this, and are. That for me, that mission is really the motivator every day.
Mhm. Your history, your background is impressive, and um, I'm eager to find out more about how you
Sure.
see micromanagement and what are your advice on this. So let's
Yeah.
start with how you define micromanagement. What do you understand through micromanagement?
Yeah, certainly. Look, I mean, to keep it really simple, micromanagement is just occurring whenever the leader is having to step in and be way more involved in the day-to-day operations than they ought to be, right? And they're basically making the decisions and having to do the jobs of the team that is working for them, right? And there's obviously a lot of you know, signs of this. I mean, some signs that you can see, right, is the leaders being directive and checking in constantly and having to be involved in a lot of the details. But the one thing that I've really come to look at is how's the team responding to that direction. And two signs that you really have a micromanagement culture or a culture where the employees have become dependent on leadership to make decisions for them. The two things that you'll see is you'll frequently hear employees asking, "What do you want me to do?" Right? So I have a problem. What do you want me to do? What that means is they've already become conditioned that this is the leader's decision, right? I'm not even supposed to, I'm just, here's a problem. What do you want me to do about it? Right. And the second sign is you hear the employees saying, "Well, I just did what I was told." Right? Meaning
Mm-hmm.
I don't own this decision. Somebody else made this decision. The fact that it didn't work is not my, I'm just doing what I was told. Right. And when I'm hearing those two things come from employees to their leaders frequently, that tells me we either have a culture of micromanagement or we had one that has now turned into a culture where they're just dependent on leadership. They've disengaged, right? They're not even trying to make decisions anymore. They're just waiting for the leader to tell them what to do.
Or they are not allowed to make a decision, maybe.
Yeah, well, but oftentimes what I think you find is there may have been a period where they weren't allowed to, right? Maybe there was
Mm-hmm.
so what happened to me was, I inherited multiple occasions. I became the plant manager, and the plant manager before me was a micromanager, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so the employees had adopted this position that it wasn't their position to tell me what they thought I should do, right? They were, I mean, very to give you a real clear example. I mean, within the first couple of weeks of my being at my first plant, we had an issue with a machine, and the shift supervisor. This was not a major issue, right? It's something that the shift supervisor should have been able to figure out. But he came to me and said, "Hey, this machine's running 2% below capacity. What do you want me to do?" And I was like, you know, well, I'd like you to make me a recommendation. That's what I'd like. What do you think we should do? I've been here 2 weeks. What do I know? And he was just stunned, right? He didn't have any idea how to give me a recommendation. And that's when I started to realize, wow, this is, I can't just sit here and tell these guys I want them to make recommendations. They are so conditioned to just ask what to do and be told what to do and do it that that they just think that's how it's supposed to be now, right? And so it's almost, become just the way it is.
Mm-hmm. And how did you change, how did you shift things in that situation?
Yeah. Well, look, in that situation, I mean, first off, I stood my ground on I would like you to make a recommendation, right? I mean, you know, and here's the thing, the challenging thing as a leader, right? When does this guy came to me, it's like 7 o'clock in the evening, everybody else has already left. I've worked 12 hours, I'm tired, I want to go home to dinner. And this guy comes to me and asks me, what do you want me to do, right? Look, it would have been really attractive in that moment to just tell him because I wanted to go home, right? And when I said, "Hey, what I'd like you to do is make me a recommendation," right? And then he just stood there and froze, and I could have just been like, "You know what? I don't have time for this. Just go fix it," right? Um, but instead, I didn't have the first idea what to do, so we proceeded to talk through it, right? I said, "Well, give me some ideas. Let's brainstorm some ideas," right? We came up with three ideas on what we could do. And then I said, "Well, so how much would it cost to do that? And how much do we get for each of those ideas?" And we kind of did the cost benefit analysis of each of the three ideas. And at the end, one of the three clearly was a better, alternative than the other two. And so I looked at him and I said, "So what do you think we should do?" And he's like, "I don't know. What do you want me to do?" And I'm
Again.
still like, yeah, I'm like, come on, like we just spent an hour doing math together, man. I said, well, which one does the math say is the better idea? And he says, well, this one. I said, so what do you think we should do? He said, that one. I said, hey,
Go do
but
it.
make it so. Go do it. Great. And look, he felt great about that conversation because he got to think through it. And he did a great job executing the decision because he had input on it, right? He owned the
Yes.
decision. It wasn't Chris's. Um, but man, that conversation took me like an hour. And you know what I realized was I got 500 employees in this plant. I can't do this 500. This is not going to work. I'm going to fail. Like if my solution is to one-off coach every employee that comes to me, this isn't going to work, right? And so that's kind of really my journey on enabling empowerment, where I said, look, I got to take a completely different approach to this. Like what I've got to start out recognizing is that this group of people is conditioned to sit and wait for me to tell them what to do. They don't know how to make a recommendation, right? They don't know how
Mm-hmm.
to think through a problem. And so what I started doing was teaching the team, in
Mm-hmm.
large groups because it's more efficient. Hey, when you have a problem, here's how you should think through that. And here's how you should think through a recommendation. So that when you come to me or you come to one of your supervisors, you should be able to say, hey, we have a problem. This is what it's
Mm-hmm.
costing us. Here's the alternatives I've considered, right? Here's the risks with each of the alternatives. This is the one I'm recommending. This is why. And that way I should just be able to maybe challenge you on a few things and then say, go do it, right? But by doing that training with all those folks, we were able to kind of close this capability gap a whole lot faster than if we were all just one-on-one coaching people, right?
Right. So you were used with another type of leadership, with another style. How so you came from another culture, so you learn yourself another
Mhm.
type of of leadership. Uh, how did you learn other approach, a healthy approach?
Yeah. Well, yeah, coincidentally, so my first job right out of the Navy at Georgia Pacific was to actually teach what Charles Koch called his decision-making framework. So, if you aren't familiar, this was around 2007, 2008 timeframe, and Charles Koch had just purchased Georgia Pacific, making it the largest privately held company in the world, right? And Charles Koch was of the belief, look, you can think what you want about his political statements, right, or political beliefs, but his view was, I'm a pretty good decision maker, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which I would say, having built the largest privately held company in the world, you should be able to stake some claim that you're a decent decision maker, right? And he had decided that I want everybody in my organization to make decisions the way I do, right? And so he developed his decision making framework and he taught all of his employees that, right? And my first job was actually to go around to the different plants in the division and teach them this decision making framework and help them think through their capital projects. Um, and it was really powerful to me because I mean, I have worked in hundreds of companies. I mean, just the ones I've worked in as an employee, but through my consulting projects, and is the only organization I've ever been in that actually made improving its employees' decision-making skills a
Mm-hmm.
purposeful objective, right? I mean, I don't know another organization that has done that has said, hey, if we are better at making decisions than our competitors, right? If we make better
Mm-hmm.
decisions than our competitors, we will win. So we are going to make making decisions be a core competency of this organization, right? And that's what he said and
Mm-hmm.
has done. And so that's kind of where I've adopted that. But for me in that moment as a plant manager was connecting the dots on this is the same problem, right? The same problem here. These folks haven't been taught how to make a decision or a recommendation. And so they're either too afraid to at this point, right? Or to your point, they just don't think it's their place.
Mm-hmm.
And they just don't know how. And so they're content to stand here and wait for me to tell them what to do. Right. And that's not very fun for me as a leader because now I'm getting phone calls at 2 o'clock in the morning and I'm there till 9 o'clock, right? Because I can't go anywhere without somebody needing me to tell them what to do, right?
All right.
So,
As you were speaking, I was thinking that I didn't meet a company to ask for this kind of training neither. So I don't know either a company
yeah.
who is interested to develop their employees in these skills. And
Well,
it's a critical skill for
yeah,
every level of a company.
yeah,
And they
yeah.
don't ask this.
Yeah, no, you're exactly right. I mean, it's kind of a stunt, right? Like when I mean, I've never said to anybody, I mean, do you think decision making skills are important for success in business? I mean, who would say no to that question? Yet then turn around and ask leaders, well, if you believe that's true, what are you doing to make your organization better than at making decisions than your competitors are? What are you doing,
Mhm.
right? And I've not found many executives who have an answer to that question, which is why I'm here, right? Because I believe that it should be. I mean, to me, it's just such an obvious. If you want to outcompete your competitors, you better make better decisions. And I do believe that decision making is a skill, right? It's something you
Mhm.
can learn and it's something you can practice and get better at, right? So if you're not deliberately improving your decision making skills, then you're giving your competitor an opportunity to get an advantage over you.
Mhm. So micromanagement is directly linked to decision-making skills.
Yes, I believe so because the reason so let's get into why people become micromanagers, right?
Yes, please.
All right. So you know, one set of reasons, right? And this is kind of the obvious, I'll call it trope that you see, in most places as well. That leader is a micromanager because, they're a narcissist and they don't trust anybody and they're a control freak and they're insecure and all this stuff, right? And look, I'm going to tell you, I'm not going to deny that there are leaders out there where that's true. I mean, that there are those folks who are out there, but I believe that they are an extremely small percent of leaders, right? They are not most leaders. Most leaders do not want to be micromanagers. It is not a good life. It sucks, right? Like you are like I said, you are tied to the cell phone. You have no life. You have no control of your schedule. You are having to make everybody's decisions. What I believe the reason most leaders who become micromanagers do it is because they have to, right? They are in a situation, they find themselves in a situation where the consequences of failure are so severe, or they have to get it done so fast that there's no other solution but to tell people what to do. The analogy to me is, if I have a, my employee and we went out swimming in a lake and they're drowning in the lake, right? That is not the time to stand and coach them on how to swim. That is the time to jump in the water and drag them back to the dock, right? That's what I need to do. That's my job as a leader. I cannot let them drown and die. I need to save them. But once I get them back to the dock, I better be thinking about how I'm going to teach them to swim. Because if I don't, I'm just going to turn around and they're going to be right back in the water and I'm going to be getting them out again, right? And that's the problem. So the problem is leaders find themselves in a situation where, because the performance of the team or whatever situation, they have to step in and
Mhm.
micromanage, but then they never can't figure out how to get out of it, right? They can't figure out how to teach those people to swim because they're too busy jumping in and saving everybody, right?
But,
So
but do they know how to teach them? Do they have the necessary skills themselves to teach their
yeah.
team members?
Well, and in many cases, that's an excellent point. They don't have that either, right? Just because you know how to swim doesn't mean you know how to teach somebody to swim,
Yes,
right?
correct. Yes.
So yeah, just because you have developed your decision-making skills over the years doesn't mean you know how to teach other people to make decisions either, right? Sometimes we're competent, but we're not even sure how we got competent, right? So that's a great point.
So, how what do you think that are the effects of micromanagement on a company and on the employees?
Yeah. The biggest one is that people don't feel ownership for the outcomes, right, of their work. And look, when I say that's the biggest one, I mean, like, I think that's probably one of the worst things that can happen in an organization. Nothing will destroy the morale than people feeling like they don't have the ability to influence the outcome, right? If they just feel like, look, I just come to work every day and I hope things go well and I hope I keep getting a paycheck, right? Like that's not a good place for people to be. That will kill morale. They need to feel like they have the ability to influence outcomes. And when they have the ability to make recommendations and those recommendations get heard and acted on, now they feel like I have an ability to influence the outcome here, right? This is, I mean, I'm influencing this. The second benefit is when they're making a recommendation, they now own the decision. They share ownership in the decision, right? Even if you make a recommendation to me and I accept it, you made it. I mean, so you have a vested interest in making sure that decision is successful, right? So you're going to go out and execute that decision better than if I just told you, Daniela, go do this because then if it goes wrong, it's not on you, right? It's on me.
Right.
And so yeah, those are some of the biggest effects.
Mm-hmm. And how do you think that a leader should train an employee to be more responsible to make decisions for himself and not being dependent on the leader? Give us just two, three suggestions, advice.
Yeah, look, the first most, I mean, helpful and simple suggestion to give is stop telling people what to do, right? Force them to give you a recommendation, right? I mean, just make it like become allergic to what do you want me to do, right? I mean, I am allergic to those words, right? When a person on one of my teams working for me comes and says, Chris, what do you want me to do? No, but I would like you to make a recommendation. Let's start with that. And if you don't have one, I'll help you think through it. But let's come up, we're going to come up with this together. So that would be the first one. And the second one is, yeah, if you are, finding yourself in this issue and you're finding that people aren't, your team is not good at making those recommendations, then you've got to come up with some way that you're going to upskill them en masse, right? It can't be just you going to one-on-one coach all of them. That's not going to work.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. How, okay, so these are some advice on how a leader should can eliminate micromanagement or eliminate this behavior of the employee coming and ask for what to do.
Mhm.
How can a manager work on himself to change his behavior and not give solutions or directions right away when an employee comes to him or her?
Yeah. Um, well, I mean, this is like with breaking any habit because it does become a habit, right? I mean, that's what I would see is like when I saw this in practice. I mean, I say I went to go visit one of the plants. I might be hanging out in the plant manager's office, and all day long I would just see employees come to the door and, hey, plant manager, this is broke or whatever. What do you want to do about it, right? And I mean, I just would say to him, like, dude, you have to stop this. You're not getting any work done, right? Like, this is not good. You have to start forcing them to at least make a recommendation to you, right? Like, stop just you're enabling this, right? And I know it's
You
not what you
allow
want.
you
Yeah,
allow this.
yeah. Yeah. And the sad part is they'll call you a micromanager, but they're walking in and asking you for it, right? Like they're asking you to do it to them. And
But they
so
you can also say, but you teach them that way.
yeah,
So it's
that's
a
right.
vice circle.
Yeah, absolutely. So look, I think the first thing on breaking any habit, right, is to acknowledge it and say it out loud that this is a problem, and to tell everybody that this is a problem and you're not going to participate in it anymore, right? I mean, there's nothing wrong with as a leader standing up and saying, "Listen, I understand. Like, here's the situation we're in, guys. You are waiting for me to tell you what to do, and that's not going to work anymore. I can't do that anymore." Now, also acknowledge it's going to take time, right? We're going to have to. It's going to be a transition to work through this. But I'm not going to stop telling you what to do overnight, right? But
Mm-hmm.
from now on, I want you to come to me making a recommendation, and I want you to listen. And when I don't ask you for the recommendation, I want you to hold me accountable, right? And tell
Mm-hmm.
me that I wanted you to make a recommendation. I mean, I think those are the biggest things because sometimes, I mean, our habits just become unconscious, right? We don't even We don't even
Right.
think about it. And so, one, telling everybody you're aware of it, and two, asking them to help hold you accountable to it is, the best way.
Hmm. And if the employees come with wrong solutions, uh, how do how would you advise a leader to give feedback in a way that supports that employee and don't shout him down and be close to come
Yeah,
back with other solutions, better solutions?
yeah. So look, that is the beautiful part of teaching them a decision-making framework to use when they're making recommendations, and everybody using the same one. The beautiful part is when they come to you with a recommendation that's off the wall or doesn't make sense, you can take them back through the same decision-making framework, right? That and say, how did you get to that conclusion, right? Like, how did you
Mm-hmm.
get to that recommendation? And then what we'll find is, well, you know what, they didn't frame the problem correctly, or
Mm-hmm.
you know what, they didn't identify the alternatives correctly, or they haven't really looked at the risks correctly, right? Or they haven't valued the costs. And so as we take them back through that decision-making framework again to get to how did we get here, we're just reinforcing it, right? We're further developing those skills. We're doing the coaching, but now we're doing the coaching with I've 80% of the coaching's been done through the training. Now I'm just doing the last 20%, right? Rather than you were at ground zero and I'm going to coach you all the way to 100.
Mm-hmm. So you can give them feedback on their decision on how they apply the training.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I'd walk back through. So, let's say the person comes to me and they make some recommendation that's kind of crazy, right? I'm going to think, man, I don't know how you came to that conclusion. Talk to me about restate the problem. How did you frame the problem, right? I'm literally going to walk through each of the steps of the decision-making framework with them again, right there. But because they've been trained on it, because they know it, it's so much faster, right? Instead of
Mm-hmm.
like
Yes.
that shift leader, instead of that conversation with that shift leader taking an hour, right? If he'd already been through the training, right, and had some familiarity with it, maybe that first conversation is only 15 minutes,
Yes.
right? Instead of an hour, it's 15 minutes. And maybe the second conversation said 15 minutes is 5 minutes. And then by the third or fourth time he's coming to me, I'm like, hey, man, these are great recommendations. You don't even need to ask me anymore. Just go do it,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
Because that's where we're really trying to get to, right? We're trying to get both the leader and the employee confident in their decision
Mm-hmm.
making so that we can eventually just say, look, you don't even need to talk to me about this anymore. Just go do it. Right.
Right. So if we have the situation in which we have, let's say, a new employee in a company that it's used with micromanagement, and this employee is
Mhm.
bothered by this style of working, uh, what can this employee do uh,
Mhm.
to how this can employee respond to this kind of micromanagement behavior?
Yeah. Yeah.
Can the employee do something?
Well, I think, yes, of course you can do something, right? There's always something you can do. What to do kind of depends on what is the reason, right? That this micromanagement is happening. And if, what I would go back to more is what's the intention of the leader, right? Is the intention of the leader to be a micromanager, right? Are they actually one of those narcissists or control freaks that wants this? And if they are, I mean, my advice to you is probably you should probably look for someplace. It's probably time to look for someplace else, right? I mean, if somebody's like that and they've been like that for 30 years, I mean, we're not going to change them, right? I mean, the bad news is it's
Maybe.
probably you could try, but I mean, but again,
Mm-hmm.
I think that is an extraordinarily small percentage of the instances, right? It's really
Mm-hmm.
very small. And so if you ask yourself, does this leader, and look, have a conversation with them, tell them how you're feeling and ask if is this how you want it to be, right? And
Mm-hmm.
if it's not, then understand that a big part of it is actually on reversing this is on you, right? And you getting that leader confident with the fact that you can make good decisions, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so coming to them with that, recommendation and asking for, hey, how is it that I'm presenting my recommendations that like it doesn't seem like you're listening to it? How can I better present my recommendation to you? Right? And look, some of the times like some simple advice I got, right? So when I first was coming up and I would come into executives' offices and have to, go over some $1 million project, I mean, I would start out getting into the engineering details about this project, right? And finally, one day, CFO stopped me and he goes, "Look, stop." He goes, I don't have time to be in the weeds on these. What are you asking for?" Right. And I was like, "Well, we need $1 million." Okay. And what do I get? Well, it's got a 30% return on investment. He goes, "You need to lead with that." Right. And I was like, okay. So, like for me, learning that, hey, an executive's really busy. I need to start my question with what do I need from you and why do I need it? Right. And then I can get into the hows and all the other stuff later. Right. But if I lead
Right.
with the hows and the other stuff, 5 minutes in, they tuned out and they don't, right. They're moved on to the next thing.
You lose them.
So that's why I'm saying that, focusing on how is it that I'm making recommendations, and how can I make them better so that my leader begins to trust me because they want to, again, if we're not dealing with the first kind of leader, right? If we're dealing with the second kind, they want to be able to trust you, right? They
Hmm.
want to be able to do that. And if you operate from that belief, then it's just a matter of working with them to figure out how do I get better at, making recommendations so that you do trust me.
Hmm. And if we have, um, so let's say we have micromanagement leaders in a company, but the company doesn't want this. What can a
Hmm.
company do to diminish these kinds of behaviors or to eliminate them?
Yeah, I think a lot of the same, I mean, some of the same things. I think, look, it absolutely, if you're a CEO or a, C-level executive and you have leaders below you that are micromanagers, you absolutely have an obligation to deal with it, right? You have
Mm-hmm.
to deal with it. And look, sometimes, I mean, again, having been, one of the senior executives in a company and having managers that worked for me that were micromanagers, one of the challenges with that is sometimes they're getting really good results, right? Like sometimes you don't want to go deal with that guy because he's getting really good result, but the problem is it's they're not doing it in a way that's sustainable, right? It's not
On the long
sustainable.
term.
It's right. It might last for a year or two, but eventually
Mm-hmm.
that person's going to burn out because they can't keep doing that, right? They can't keep telling everybody what to do all the time. They're either going to burn out or they're going to leave or whatever's going to happen. And then there's going to be a void, a group of people who's not good at making decisions. So the first thing is if you see it, you better deal with it. You similarly need to understand, is this intentional behavior or is it unintentional,
Mm-hmm.
right? And if it's unintentional, then look, I think the biggest thing, you can do is step in and say, we're going to give you the resources to upskill these people to get them to where you don't have to live like this anymore, right? I mean, that was when I found myself in situations where, I was having to micromanage because whatever the situation, right? Support a leader could give to me was, look, Chris, I understand why you're doing this and I get it, but we got to figure a way out of this. What resources do you need to get out of this situation? Right. And understand that's where I think a lot of times people go, right. Again, they attack the intention. They think the person's doing it on purpose. Right. Or they're doing it because they want to do it. And I think that's rarely the case. So figuring out how to
Mm-hmm.
help them is the right answer.
Uh, that was the last question, Christopher. Thank you very much for your
Yeah.
insight and for your contribution. I think that this conversation is very useful for our listeners. I want to ask you one more question. How can
Mhm.
people learn more about your work and how can they reach you?
Yeah, absolutely. So, first, I would encourage you. I mean, if this topic has been interesting at all, you pick up a copy of the book on Amazon. Again, it's Enabling Empowerment, Leadership Playbook for Ending Micromanagement, Empowering Decision Makers. Or you can go over to www.enablingempowerment.com. And the book has a lot of templates and tools and stuff in it that you can use. And those templates and tools are all also available on the website. So if you want to download, I mean, there are
Mhm.
free financial models, free, templates for thinking through decisions or having conversations with people that you can go download.
The book is recently launched, right?
Yes, in September. So
Oh, this year.
Yes, ma'am.
Congratulations for
Thank
this
you.
book.
Thank you.
It's a big thing
Yeah,
for
thank you.
companies, for those who want to have a better leadership skills and to manage
Yeah.
people better. Thank you very much. It was very useful to talk with you.
Yes, ma'am. I appreciate it.
Thank you.